Hi, my friend, Caleb Johnson here, and I have a huge question to ask you, real estate investors. How would you rate your level of personal discipline on a scale of 1 to 10? If your answer is anything less than a 10, I've got something neat for you. And let me tell you, discipline means pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone and doing things that are difficult and sometimes boring. Achieving massive success requires you to do those difficult things. Building your levels of personal discipline is not easy, but it does pay off. In fact, you can't achieve anything significant without discipline. Now, I just released a program for investors where I walk with you as an accountability coach to aid you stay on track so you can push yourself to do the hard things that greatness is going to require of you. Starting is easy. Go to redccapitalgroup.com and click accountability coaching at the top right of the screen. So let's get to work, and now to the interview. How's it going, everyone? My name is Caleb Johnson, host of From Trial to Triumph. Today, I am very excited about our guest. His name is Kyle Gordon. Kyle has been in the counseling world for 30 years, and he has created, owned, and sold over 3 businesses, and he also is active in sales training and educating professionals. So, Kyle, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited to have you here. And full disclosure to the listeners that Kyle is actually my counselor, and he I consider him a life coach, and he has been a tremendous help in my life. So I really appreciate you, brother, for what you've done, and I know what you continue to do for the community. And for us to start, can you go ahead and give our listeners just a quick synopsis about you and just where you kind of started from?
Where I started from, I think a seed for counseling was born in me at a very young age. I grew up in the 50s and the early 60s, and that was a time when children, the prevailing attitude in regard to children is they should be seen and not heard. My father being a naval officer and an aviator, they were required to attend social functions, typically about once a month, sometimes a little more frequently. As we were new to Southern California, San Diego, children were allowed to attend with the parents. And my parents didn't like leaving us with babysitters, as they really didn't have any. So children were allowed to attend, but they were forced to sit on a couch off to the side where they were expected to be still and quiet without providing disruption. I have a very active mind, and I bore very easily. So to occupy my mind, I found myself paying attention to how people interacted with one another. And throughout the course of an evening, I could see how the men would talk to one another. I could see how the women would talk to one another. I could see how men would talk to women, spouses included. And then through the course of the evening, I could see how that changed as alcohol was applied to their time. And I could see a morphosis on conditions and attitudes and communication and conversation. So from a very early age, I spent an immense amount of time watching people, how they responded to the things that people said, and coming into a recognition. Oftentimes, if someone had said something a little bit different, their outcome would have been tremendously different. So that I could probably talk for a couple of hours on that. So I might just probably ought to leave that alone. But that birthed in me an interest that carried over into sales, and motivational speaking. It carried over certainly into my counseling practices. As for me, the biggest part of communication or conversation is the listening aspect. I've got 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth. I should use those things then on a 4-to-1 ratio. Eyes and ears over mouth. So I tend to watch, I tend to listen, but I don't hear. I've learned over the years to not just hear the explicit of what someone's saying, but I really listen to and tend to hear the implicit of what they're saying, what they meant by what they said. Too often times, conflict in communication or in sales, loss of sales, how you can apply it to almost anything, is the listener listened to the explicit statement that a person made, and they weren't listening to what they meant by what they said. And if they try to provide or answer the explicit, they're not addressing the root or the heart of the matter, and conflict can reside in In sales, it ends up being a not sale or a think it over rather than moving someone into making a positive decision that benefits both. In counseling, um, it's more of an aspect of people want to feel comfortable that they can bear their heart. So in counseling, the first several get-togethers, if you will, or sessions, are primarily someone testing the waters of, can I trust this person? So they'll provide subtle little statements that explicitly may not mean much, but implicitly can mean a great deal. So if I'm then in a position where I can tell them things about themselves that they've not divulged to me or they've not exposed to me, but yet I don't judge them, but I accept them just as they are, that breaks the barriers in most instances down to where we can really accomplish something in a conversational counseling aspect.
But if we took a slight pivot into sales training, I know there's a lot of salespeople that listen to this
Mm-hmm.
show, and I honestly think everyone's a salesman. If you're a husband, you want to sell your wife on what you're going to have for dinner. If you have children, you want to sell your kids on doing their homework. Everything can kind of be correlated with sales. And when you train people in sales currently, what is one of the most difficult things that you think people in sales struggle with?
Well, the first and overwhelming one, and it has, while it applies to selling, that's a fear of rejection. Whether it be telephone work, appointment setting, face to face, whether it be B2B or B2C, be in the environment of being in front of the consumer, fear of rejection. And if it's a large group of people that are maneuvering in the same selling environment, then there's the way they appear amongst their peers as well to be considered. So not only do they fear rejection, they fear failure. Understanding those two aspects and equipping someone to recognize that that's the way they feel, but instead of it disabling them, allowing them to harness it and channel it to be very enabling for more powerful production. Um, so I would say that's overwhelming number one. Number two, and I used to have companies contact me wanting me to come into their company, develop a sales presentation for them, and then train and equip their people to deliver that sales presentation because their thought was this: if we had a perfect sales presentation, our numbers would go up. If we had a sales presentation that met the customer's needs and exposed need and desire on behalf of the potential customer, and our presentation would do that, then more people would buy, or more people would take advantage of our product or service. And they spend a whole lot of time on the presentation um, when it's where the least amount of time should be spent. The most amount of time should be causing someone to come in an understanding as to identifying a person's needs, knowing when they're genuine, and then applying an approach that's based on that person's decision style, if you will, personality style. The same thing can be true in ministry. People receive and disseminate information from three different categories. There's four personality types, but for decision-making processes, there's only three. So if I can discern your learning style, then I can provide what information I have based on what your needs are in such a way that it will empower you to make a decision rather than cause you to shut me off, shut me out, or just look for ways of extricating yourself from the selling experience. Does that make sense?
It does. And what are those three learning, those three different ways that people learn?
Well, there's audio, visual, and kinesthetic. So some people learn by hearing, some people learn by seeing, and some people learn, while this is a rarer form, some people learn from doing, more action involved. Now that's hard to do if you're in a home or if you're across a desk from a potential client on business to business. But if you can identify there's something of a kinesthetic learner, they'll also be partially audio or visual. So if I can then provide a visual style or an audio style with kinesthetics, I have a much greater chance of not only capturing but keeping that individual's attention. So in a selling environment, kinesthetics can just be hand motions. They can be physical exaggerations, body language, seeing movement, seeing something go like a kinesthetic learner with me talking to him like this. I would have his attention wrapped at least for a few moments. And if the information I'm giving him is information that's based on what his needs and wants are, he's not only going to receive it, he's going to inculcate it, and he's going to believe it to be true because of the way it was presented to him.
Okay. And if we went back to the rejection piece, that
Mm-hmm.
number one thing that salespeople struggle with, how can someone use that rejection as a good driving force to increase their business?
Okay. First of all, um, we've all met salespeople. I've been accused of being one at times in my earlier life. Individual that could sell ice cubes to an Eskimo or your refrigerator to an Eskimo. Um, there really is no truth to that. Um, what does apply, though, is if a person is after a sale just because he needs or wants the sale, that person is almost never afraid of failure. They're a hard driver. If this one says no, I'm going to pound him until he asks me to leave or he says yes. And if I can't get either one, then I'm going to move on to the next. So the attitude, some will, some won't. So what next? Which is not a bad attitude to have. But for most people involved in sales, they don't exist that way. Those people are already doing well in sales. They may be doing well for the wrong reasons. They may be doing well for selfish reasons. But as far as a business or an industry is concerned, a corporation is concerned, they don't care. They just want the business.
Mm-hmm.
Most salespeople want the person that they're trying to sell to have the product or service they're proposing to be a benefit to that person. Does that make sense?
It does.
So in any good sale, it's not mutually beneficial. The consumer or the buyer should benefit at least a little bit more than the seller. When that's true, most people will buy. There's some caveats to that. But we spend very little time in what I'll just sum up as needs analysis. Most people, if they have a business to business, they know they have 15 or 20 minutes to come in, whether they're selling XYZ copier or whatever they're trying to sell, software, hardware, whatever it may be. They know they have 15 to 20 minutes, and they just come in, and here's where the presentation. The company has spent a lot of money on presentation material, so what they have is a fairly tightly wired 15-minute presentation that's designed to build need and desire, and then get a yes or no from the person. And IBM, their sales numbers were always exceptionally high because what they did first was they ran all of their salespeople through a personality index. So they knew which three categories they fell in as far as a buyer would be concerned, so that when they developed leads and sources, they could identify what personality index the potential buyer was, and they could match the sales rep to the potential buyer, so they had like personalities. So if your personality style was the same as mine, and I presented to you naturally the things that I wanted you to hear about my product or service, you would be more apt to receive them, and I would have a greater chance of doing business. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
Okay. So that still limits your overall numbers. That still leaves what I call, or I would look at as a lot of business laying on the table that could have been captured or garnered. Is for you to set aside your time to see me about anything means that you have a need someplace or you wouldn't waste your time.
Right.
So if I have an appointment to see, it doesn't matter what it is. If I have an appointment to see you, whether it's on the phone or in your office or in your home, there's something you're hoping I could do for you. You'd not set across that time. You would not set aside that time. And
Mm-hmm.
when I add to that, the other dynamic is most people don't like to deal with salespeople. So when you set aside time to look at something, you're setting aside time not only to look at something that you're hoping could benefit you, but you're going to endure it by having it presented to you by a salesman. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
It
So
does.
there's something that exists in this person that they want or need. And most salespeople spend no time trying to identify what that is. What does it look like? If you had that, what would it do for you? What have you looked at before? Have you tried? You see where I'm going? So there's my sales presentation right there, is when I start to glean information about what you're looking for, what you need, what you don't need or what you don't want, what have you tried before and what's been your experience, allows me then to craft my product or service and rephrase it back to you in exactly the manner that you need to hear it, where I have a tremendously higher opportunity or chance of you of coming into agreement and doing business. And since I know what you need, and I know it's something you need, I know it's something you want, if you tell me no, then I have to receive that not as rejection, but as from a position of, then I haven't provided you enough information to give you the confidence you deserve to take action on my product or service. And sometimes I can even voice it that way and ask them directly, so what do you need to see? What do you need to hear? What's missing for you to have that confidence? And they will tell you. That's the bizarre thing that most people never get.
Mm-hmm. I'm reading a book right now. I'm in the middle of it for the second time actually in a row. It's The Secrets. Oh, it's by Zig Ziglar, and it's about secrets. The secrets to closing a sale, I believe. And he says quite often that people say no, right, to a salesman because they do not KNOW. They don't
Right.
know enough.
Yeah.
And so from my understanding of what you're saying that is so impactful for salespeople, and I'm repeating this again so everyone listening to this can implement it and digest it further, but that people do not reach the numbers or the level of sales that they want because they don't qualify enough. They don't ask enough questions of the client and really understand what that need is. If I see someone that's overweight and I'm selling treadmills, well, what's the reason you want to buy a treadmill? Well, because my husband thinks that I need to lose weight and be more sexy or whatever that is. And you
hmm
might think it's something completely different. And so you try to sell them on this other idea that's your own idea, but
That's right.
it's not the real need and the real reason that they want to buy that from you.
And taking what your example is a step further, in the illustration you used, the wife said, "My husband wants me to lose some weight, and her hope is that she'll be more." Okay, that's great. That's what your husband wants. What do you want? So we don't follow up that question with her reasoning for looking at this may be because she's trying to make herself more desirable. She's trying to lose weight. But when you're doing something for someone else, when it comes time to put pen to paper and sign, you can think of all manner of reasons as, well, if I'm only doing it to satisfy him, how long will I really do this? Maybe this is just a waste of money. Maybe I shouldn't buy this right now. So can you call me back? Let me think this over for a week. Can you call me back next week? Instead of identifying, what are you looking for? What's your interest in it? I get your husband. I understand that. And obviously you desire at some level to satiate that, to do that for your husband. But I've got to still turn it in what's in it for you. So that's just, is to follow your point, that's just more qualifying.
Right. Right. And for the listener, so they understand, qualifying is asking a question that is just pulling more information out and kind of qualifying what the client says or the potential client says so that you understand more of what they're actually saying from what they're saying.
That's right. And in a selling environment, whoever's asking the questions is in control. And if I'm trying to learn what their wants and needs are, and I'm trying to motivate them to take action on my product or service, and first, let me say too, that if I ever found in a presentation or selling environment that my product would not fulfill this customer's real wants or needs, or even worse, would be a detriment to them, I cease trying to sell, and then I start to refer. So
Mm-hmm.
that said, though, uh, um, I forgot where I was going. I'm sorry, Caleb.
That's okay. That's okay. Well, I do have some. You said something earlier that really stood out to me was that the reason salespeople often they're driving so hard sometimes they just want the next sale, the next sale, the next sale,
Hmm.
and like you said, that's great for the corporation that's employing them or having them on retainer. But sometimes that can be just a selfish ambition, which might be detrimental. And so, can you explain to the listeners just what the reason is that that might hurt the salesman?
What's that? The attitude or the desire to move on to the next sale, the next sale, the next sale?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Well, there's several dynamics that should be looked at, and I'm going to look at the one that I think is the most important. Um, if you consider, if we just think about Tiger Woods for a second, what's his profession? It's golf. How much time, if you look at his professional career, how much time is actually spent on the golf course competing,
Not as much as it's compared to practicing, I would think.
practicing?
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing could be true with, you look at a doctor. How much time has he spent practicing before he ever sees his first patient? In many instances, it's 12 years, unless he's a specialized surgeon. Basketball, football, baseball, none of them spend anywhere near the amount of time of doing what they do to earn an income as they do in their practicing. A golf instructor of some renown that goes back some years ago, he's since passed away. His name's Harvey Penick. And he tried to demystify the old adage of practice makes perfect. He says it's a lie. If you've got bad habits and you continue to practice bad habits, all you're perfecting is a bad habit. So you have to look at it as perfect practice makes perfect. So even in sales, if you have an element of your presentation that's off and you continue to practice and practice and practice trying to make it better, but you're practicing flawed material, in my view, people think that their money comes from being in front of a customer, being in front of the consumer. Again, whether it be B2B or B2C, whatever it happens to be. That's where their money comes from. I don't get paid for study. I don't get paid for research. I don't get paid for these things. My chance to make money only comes from being in front of someone. So that's their drive. But the pro spends as much time equipping himself, training himself, expanding his knowledge, expanding his repertoire. He spends more time doing that, or at least as much time doing it, as he does prospecting or selling. When that's the case, I've seen some people that had mediocre numbers go on to stardom because they were serious about making themselves better. When I first started in the food business some time ago, I had already come from a background of sales and motivational speaking, sales training. Um, but I'm doing something brand new. And this was a very intricate presentation that was 2 hours in a home. And so there's many elements to learn. So every day when I came into the office, I was wanting to practice. And I would ask, if you were in that office, say, Caleb, you got a few minutes? I'd like to work on such and such with you. I'd like to hear your such and such. Or I'd like you to hear my such and such and get your feedback. Well, it got to the point where I pestered people so much that when I came into the office, everybody left. Because if they're sitting around drinking coffee or eating a donut, I was going to ask them to work with me. I wanted to make them better too, but my desire was for me to spend my time to make myself as good as I possibly could. So I went from being a brand new person in an office that was the lowest on the totem pole to within 2 months being the number one person in the office and doing more numbers than probably 5 or 6 people combined. But that was only because of my diligence to practice, perfect practice, to I recorded myself. I recorded myself while I watched myself in a mirror so I could check my facial expressions, my body language. These are all things that I practiced. And then I practiced with others. And I wanted to hear their presentations. Part of my presentation, one of the most powerful parts of my presentation, I learned from someone who was the worst closer in the office. So I got something very, very powerful from someone that no one would spend time with because he was the worst closer in the office. And it came from, let me hear your presentation. So I'm kind of gone down maybe a little bit of a rabbit hole, but salespeople have egos. If when it comes time to sell, check your ego at the door. You can learn something from anyone. You can learn something from everyone, and be a taskmaster at doing something every day to improve yourself.
Kyle, where I think of is that I can practice all day, right? And something that I want to pull out for the listeners is that what Kyle said is just so beautiful, that you need to be diligent in what you do and you're going to reach success. Now, the caveat to that, right, is perfect practice. You need to be practicing in the best way that you can, and which is going to give you that success. Now, Kyle, how do people, there might be people listening to this right now that are practicing, right? They're just going, and they aren't looking up to analyze their systems and processes. Mm-hmm. Now, how can someone start to practice perfect?
If there's not an outline that exists, or a system that exists that you can perfect the system, Tony Robbins comes to mind. He has a myriad of salespeople that when he goes into a locale to put on a convention, he has salesmen going into businesses everywhere, putting on a presentation, trying to get them to the company to buy for their sales reps this opportunity to go see Tony Robbins. They have a presentation that's 45 minutes long that they're required to give. They're not allowed to see the first person until they've stood in front of a group of peers and senior management and not only delivered the presentation perfectly word for word, but delivered it with the timbre, the tempo, and the dynamics required so that it exactly represented Tony Robbins in the way that he wanted to be represented. So in other words, they went into a business looking just like Tony Robbins, except for how they may look in a mirror. That doesn't exist with many companies. Most salespeople have to learn or discern that on their own. So I would say the biggest thing that people fail to do is track their numbers. Recognize where their successes have been, where their failures have been. If they were successful, that doesn't mean there isn't something to learn from it, but what was successful about that presentation? Where do I think momentum turned to where the person became receptive, recognizing where I might be weak, and not knowing how I might change where I'm weak, then getting the input from others. In other words, me trying to take a part of my presentation and present it to you, and if I were to ask you then, if I were in your home, if I were in your business, and I said this to you, how would that make you feel? And not just taking yours for it, but getting a myriad of other people so I can get kind of in a consortium. And if I can recognize too, by spending a few minutes, how does Caleb make his decisions? How do these other people make their decisions? Now I can start to parse together a presentation that has wide-ranging effect on all three personality styles. And I'm using words and phrases that are empowering them to take action and not disabling them to take action.
Okay. Wow. So to digest, to pull that apart for the listeners, it's that you need to having your peer help you, and especially having someone that might, like you said with the example of Tony Robbins, they require senior management to be in the room and these people giving the demonstration there with the senior management so they understand what that needs to look like.
Yes.
So having another professional actually that's in the same organization as you and
And gone
knows
through the
what
same process.
right, exactly. And wow, that's golden. How does someone find that person, right? There might be people, I think especially finding a mentor, finding a counselor can be so hard. And I've heard horror stories of people that they are seeking help and maybe they spend 20 grand on an education course that was just to get them in the door and they didn't actually learn something from that. Now, how do people find someone that will be the person that is just perfectly suited for them?
Well, we're kind of looking at from a different venue or different avenue, another selling environment. One has a need. He's looking to another person to potentially fulfill that need. But what goes awry in most instances is the person that they hope can fulfill the need has an expense to him that may be insurmountable or may require some justification, and or as approach, for instance, in the $20,000 thing you just mentioned, there are people that will come in. Let me say that I've had in my time people that offered me money to come in and look at their selling environment and create a sales track for them, if you will, a sales presentation, and then stay behind for at least a couple of weeks to train their existing sales force to where they can go out and implement that sales presentation, and for which you do that for a fee. Well, I would never take a fee until I'd been into a person's business, I understood his business, and if it was in-home sale, then I've ridden with a couple of different reps, a good one, a mediocre one, and a poor one, on their in-home presentation. Or if it was business to business, I've gone with a couple of a good, a mediocre, and a poor salesman into the business environment to hear their presentation, because I want to have a confidence that before we do anything, I have something that can benefit this business, this person, this business, this sales force. If I don't feel that, then there's no amount of money that's ever going to allow me to be creative enough to create something that's going to bring them any success. Does that make sense? So before I can sell anything, I have to know that I can be a benefit to them for that thing. So there are people out there like that. Um, I would say they're few and far between, and that's not necessarily looking for something for free. But I think it goes part and partial to, you know, the number of people that are willing to spend $5, 10, 15, $20,000 or more with someone because they believe it's going to create ultimate selling success for them. There are many.
Mm-hmm.
But probably 90% of those that are willing to spend that money or do, they get lazy and they don't put into practice what they've learned. Or they're thinking the money in and of itself should be enough, that there's something magical that can just transpire in a few minutes worth of time that's going to be the key ingredient to turn my selling success around. Where it's not unlike I'm a former bodybuilder. I know you lift weights now. How many people do you come into the gym that look like they've never been in a gym, and they fall away from the gym because after having spent there 3 months there, they don't look like Arnold Schwarzenegger yet?
Many. You can't
Many.
count them. Mm-hmm.
Now, in sales, it's not as slow a process as bodybuilding is, but it is a process. And you have to do every step, every day, at every level to the very best of your ability. There'll come a time when you put in that effort where you're only reviewing periodically. You're looking at your numbers or your success to ensure that you haven't taken a step backwards, that you're still at a plane or a place that you desire to be. You're no longer trying to train or equip yourself. You've reached, you know, I've had many people, I've interviewed salespeople that they come into a business wanting to make $100,000. And they see that what I'm working with them on, they could easily make that $100,000. but that's what they say they want to make. What they need to make is something totally different. So I know their effort level is going to be based around what they need. So if they want to make 100,000, but they only need to make 30, guess what they're going to make? They're going to make 30 or 35. Does that make sense? Because most people, that's the way most, not everyone, but that's the way most people are. So then, from a sales management standpoint, I have to work with, or have worked with, how do I motivate this person that has every capability of earning that $100,000, but he's satisfied with 30 or 35,000? How do I motivate him to do more? Well, that's an easy process too, but there's some very sometimes uncomfortable tactical things that have to be done to bring that person into their ultimate success. Now, I think I've probably gone way off on a tangent there for you, so maybe I ought to shut up and let you take
No,
a go.
now I do want to follow that a little bit, and if someone, because in full transparency, Kyle, I feel like I can be there where I want to have more financial success. I think everyone wants more and more and more. That's just human nature. But if someone wants to gain more financial success, but they're comfortable at that $30,000 mark, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they think they can be at 100, or maybe you as the educator sees that they have the potential to make $100,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of those steps that they can take to get closer to that number?
Well, I have to find leverage. People
Mm-hmm.
change when the fear of not changing is greater than the fear of change. So if a person's level of comfort is that $30,000, it provides for his needs. It gives him, he still has time for whatever hobbies he wants. He has personal freedom. If he wants to be lazy, if he wants to watch TV all weekend, it's a level that he can become complacent at, and he doesn't care to change it. So he won't change it until the fear of not changing it is greater than the fear of changing it. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. So I have to find some means of leveraging them. So one of the questions I always wanted to know, well, if I interviewed a salesman, most salesmen that fall into that ilk of wanting to make 100,000 but settling for 30,000, they're married, and they only need to make 30,000 because that's what's going to keep their wife happy. And based on what their bills and expenses are, with the wife's income combined with his income, they have a fairly comfortable lifestyle. Does that make sense? So the only place I've got, the immediate place I have room for leverage with him then is with his spouse. So when I interview someone, or in years past when I interviewed someone, I would always ask them, if there's anything, would you want me to withhold anything from you if it's going to directly contribute to your success? They would answer no. And that would be the end of my questions. So if I had a guy that could be doing much, much better, he could be much stronger, he just doesn't apply himself, or when he comes into the office and works, he only half works, or he'll work for an hour or two and spend the rest of the day futzing around. I'm going to tell him what his objectives are. I'm going to put those in front of him a couple of times, and I'm going to try to motivate him to do better. And if I can't, he's told me that he wants me to withhold nothing from him. I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to call his wife. I called every person's spouse, whether it be male or female, early on in their sales training. I want to introduce myself to the spouse. I want to let them know that feel free to ask any questions you would desire to ask of who we are, what we do, what your husband's activities are. You deserve to have complete confidence that he's made a good decision for himself and for your family by him associating with whatever. And I would like the opportunity to call on you should I ever need you. Would you give me that opportunity? And they would always say yes. So now if I'm struggling getting this, if I've got Caleb struggling, struggling to get Caleb to work, or I'm struggling to get Caleb to apply himself, I'm going to call Caleb's wife now. And I'm going to, whatever her name is, Michelle, hey, this is Kyle, I need your help. And because I've already introduced myself, she always said, how can I help you? Well, I'm having a real struggle. Caleb comes in, he has every talent, he has every ability. He could be well on track to that $90,000, $100,000 a year mark, but he seems to be satisfied with 30 or 35. So instead of coming in and applying himself, I can only get him to work an hour and a half a day, and then it seems like he props up his feet or would rather go fishing or something. Can you give me any advice? Can you help me in any way? And almost always she would say, well, not really, but thanks for the call. Well, who was asking for a meeting with me the next day?
He was.
Caleb. And when he comes into my office, what do you want to know? He's ranting and raving. I've just fronted him off, haven't I? I've just taken his cushion. You see where I'm going? Uh, that's just a quick example, or maybe it wasn't so quick, of I got to find leverage someplace. I never, used to be in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, people would tell their salespeople to get in debt. They wanted to get in debt so that their need increased and they could get more production, they could get more. I'm not of that ilk. I want the other way around. I want you to get out of debt. I want you to make so much money that you're putting money that is going to work for you. You see where I'm going? Uh, so I look for other motivations, but with anyone, if you spend some time with them, you can find something that they want or need that you can use to leverage to get more activity from it. Sometimes it's short term, sometimes it's long term. Find out something they need. There's something that, regardless of how lazy a person is or how much they're not applying themselves, there is something that they would be willing to apply themselves and take themselves out of that comfort zone to go after or try to attain. I've got to find what that is.
Mm. Wow, that's powerful, and I feel like again we could talk much longer, but I feel like we've reached a certain point where we should probably start asking the final three questions.
Okay.
And Kyle, if the first question would be, if you can recommend a book to our listeners to read, what would that book be?
I think well, for me, from my standpoint, from my walk, it would be the book of James in the Bible. That would be the number one book to read. I don't think that's the direction you're looking for.
Still a good recommendation, but if you do have another one on your mind, that
I would say it would be pertinent to where the person needs growth. I think everyone needs, they may not want it, but they need to understand how to communicate better. And that most communication is a product of good listening and not good talking. So there are many books in regard to learning to communicate better. I suggested one to you the other day that's a very, very old book, and that's How to Master the Art of Selling Anything by Tom Hopkins. That's a book that, on the surface, you would not read it and think you're improving your communication. But in the reading of it and the application of it, you are most definitely improving your communication. But books on understanding, I think know yourself. So I think there's many people, particularly men, that really don't know themselves. They're not even willing to be transparent with themselves, much less a significant other. Um, so I think there's a wide array of self-improvement books, but it would almost be like if I were a doctor, there's no one book I could give you to read that's going to have you change to a healthy life. I don't know if you've got problems with colon, you've got problems with thyroid, you've got problems with sinuses, you've got allergies. I don't know. I'd have to discern where you can have the greatest impact with yourself. But I think if a person was transparent with themselves and they just asked of themselves, where's my greatest need? Where's my biggest weakness? And they choose to be transparent about that weakness, even if it's only to themselves. And then they look for some help, self-help, or look for some counsel someplace or some direction on what can I do or where can I go, that would have the biggest impact in regard to what I think you're asking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a great book, especially the book that you recommended to me. I can definitely attest to that. I would highly recommend that book to the listeners to pick up. Now, Kyle, is there a way that people can maybe learn more about you or just what you teach or maybe get in touch with you?
Well, I'd be happy for anyone to have my email address as an initial contact. Um, I have started building a website. I don't think most people get to know people via a website, so it's not. It's almost ready to put live. It's Proverbs 20.5 is the name of the website, or 25. But I'm happy for anyone to have my phone number or my email address. If there's something in their mind that they feel like I could help them with, I would not be doing God's will if I denied any help I could be to someone if I denied that help. As far as a counseling relationship, anyone that would want to talk to me, the first and most important thing is for the two of us to spend some time together so that they can feel some surety that they're comfortable with me. There's no sense in them getting involved in any kind of an ongoing relationship with someone, or going to any expense, if you will, unless they feel comfortable with the person that they're attempting to seek help from.
Absolutely. And what's your email address for the
The
listeners?
simplest one is kdg@usa.com.
Okay. And I'll be sure to put that in the show notes. And Kyle, if you can share one last thing with our listeners that you
Sure.
think they can take away from today's show, what would that be?
Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Be not conformed to this world. Don't let this world's trials, troubles, tribulations deter you, get you down. Don't let your life's frustrations, but continue to renew your mind. There's a scripture that says, "Count it all joy, my brother, when you face diverse trials and tribulations." I've learned more from my failures or from trials or tribulations than I've ever learned from successes. And I know that when I face a trial, I don't look at it as a trial, I look at it as an opportunity, because I recognize God is trying to show me something. There's something in this that God's trying to show me. Sometimes they're painful. So if they're painful, then I want to say to the Lord, let me not experience this and not learn everything that you would have me learn from it so that I never have to endure this pain again. But it's still for my growth, for my greater good, and for his greater glory. So the renewing of your mind, I think, is the most significant thing. If you're not studying, if you're not learning something on a continual basis, then you're going backwards.
Wow. Praise God. Kyle, thank you so much for sharing that information. And I know spending your time here was a great blessing to me, and I know it definitely blessed our listeners. So thank you for being open to share and spending your time with us.
Anytime, Caleb. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Well, everyone, I hope you all have a great day, and we'll catch you at the next one.
It's time to grab your victory. Find us on the web at redseacapitalgroup.com and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Red Sea Capital Group.